In the mid-1970s, a phantom began haunting the suburbs of Sacramento, California. He didn't start with murder. He started as the East Area Rapist. He was a master of surveillance, watching families for days before striking. He knew their schedules, their floor plans, and even where they kept their spare keys.
His MO was uniquely cruel. He would break into a home, shine a blinding flashlight into the eyes of a sleeping couple, and tie them up with shoelaces or clothesline. He would then place stacks of dishes on the husband's back and tell him, "If I hear one plate rattle, I'll kill you both." He wasn't just a criminal, he was a sadist. He would stay in the houses for hours, eating the family's food, drinking their beer, and mocking them. Sometimes, he would call his victims months later, whispering "gonna kill you" into the phone, just to let them know he was still watching. As the 1970s turned into the 1980s, the attacker moved south to Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange County. His crimes turned lethal. Now known as the original Night Stalker, he began murdering couples in their beds. The brutality was unmatched, and the police were completely baffled by his ability to vanish. Despite leaving behind DNA, fingerprints, and footprints, he was never caught. He was athletic, capable of jumping high fences and running through miles of canals to escape. Composite sketches varied wildly because he always wore a mask or used a flashlight to obscure his face. By 1986, the murders suddenly stopped. For decades, the files gathered dust. The monster seemed to have vanished into thin air. It wasn't until the late 90s that DNA technology proved the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man, the Golden State Killer. The case might have stayed cold if not for true crime writer Michelle McNamara. She became obsessed with unmasking him, coining the name Golden State Killer. Her research and the public interest she generated put immense pressure on cold case investigators to use new technology. In 2018, investigators tried a radical new tactic, forensic genealogy. They uploaded the killer's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public ancestry site. They didn't find the killer, but they found his distant cousins. This allowed them to build a massive family tree spanning back to the 1800s. The tree led them to a specific branch in the Sacramento area. They narrowed the suspects down by age, gender, and location. One name stood out: Joseph James DeAngelo. He was a 72-year-old grandfather living a quiet life in the suburbs, and he was a former police officer. Police began tailing DeAngelo. They watched him at the grocery store and outside his home. They waited for him to discard something with his DNA on it. Finally, they recovered a piece of trash, a tissue, from his garbage can. The lab results were a 100% match to the 1970s crime scenes. On April 24, 2018, officers waited outside DeAngelo's home. When he stepped outside to work on his car, they swarmed him. He was shocked, reportedly muttering that he had pushed out the internal person who had committed the crimes decades ago. The shadow was finally in the light. The public was horrified to learn that while DeAngelo was committing some of his earliest crimes, he was wearing a police badge. He had been a cop in Exeter and Auburn, even working on burglary task forces. He used his professional training to bypass locks and evade his own colleagues. During his time as a cop, he was fired for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent, tools of his other trade. After being fired, he worked as a truck mechanic for 27 years, living as a seemingly normal neighbor who was known only for having a short temper about his lawn. In 2020, to avoid the death penalty, DeAngelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder and dozens of kidnappings and rapes. Because the statute of limitations had passed on many rapes, he admitted to them in a factual basis statement that took hours for prosecutors to read aloud. The most powerful moment came during the victim impact statements. For 3 days, elderly survivors and the children of those he murdered stood feet away from him, calling him a pathetic old man. DeAngelo sat in a wheelchair, appearing frail, a sharp contrast to the monster they remembered. DeAngelo was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His capture proved that no matter how much time passes, DNA and dedicated investigative work can bridge the gap. The Golden State Killer would finally die behind bars, no longer a phantom. The capture of DeAngelo revolutionized criminal investigations. Forensic genealogy is now used to solve hundreds of cold cases every year. It serves as a warning to those who think they got away with it. Your own DNA, or that of a distant relative, may eventually bring you to justice. Investigators later found that DeAngelo had kept trophies from his victims for years, though he had discarded most of them before his arrest. He had lived a life of total compartmentalization, raising 3 daughters who had no idea their father was a serial killer. Today, Joseph James DeAngelo resides in a California state prison. The man who once terrorized entire neighborhoods by hiding in their closets is now the one locked away. The streets of California are safer, and the families of his victims finally have the one thing they lacked for 40 years, the truth. The Golden State Killer case remains the gold standard for cold case resolutions. It highlights the importance of never giving up on a victim.